The answer, I'm sure you won't be surprised, it's not revolutionary and it's not something that's new. It has a lot to do with money. And money in politics, again, it's not a new thing, but the Supreme Court decision in Citizens United versus the Federal Elections Commission really opened the floodgates for corporations to spend millions of dollars on all kinds of tactics, astroturf campaigns, high-priced lobbyists, to really influence policy and politics and to boost their bottom line. So today we're going to talk about the Citizens United case and what role corporate lobbyists are playing in our policy process and how we as young people can affect and be a part of addressing this issue. So today I'm joined by three panelists. We have Lee Fong, who is a researcher with Think Progress. You may have seen his work covering the attacks on public workers in the Wisconsin budget battle. We're also joined by Robert Weissman, who is the president of Public Citizen. Public Citizen is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to ensure that all citizens have a voice in the halls of power. And we're also joined by David Korn, who is the Mother Jones Washington bureau chief. Until 2007, he was the Washington editor of The Nation, and he has also written for The Washington Post, New York Times, Los Angeles Times, and is the author of several best-selling books. Let's give our panelists a hand. So, Robert, can you tell us, just give us some background on the Citizens United decision and the impact that it's had on our political system?
Yeah, I'll try to do that in 2 minutes. Let me answer with a question first. How many of you know what the Citizens United case is? Okay. How many of you know what Brown v. Board of Education is? Okay. Citizens United is the anti-Brown versus Board of Education of our time. Brown was about expanding our democracy and delivering on the American promise. Citizens United is the opposite. It's about engineering a corporate takeover of our democracy and undermining the ability of real, live, breathing human beings to influence the decisions that guide what we do. In 2010, the Supreme Court held in Citizens United v. Federal Election Commission by a 5-4 majority that corporations have the exact same political speech rights as real, live, breathing human beings. So a First Amendment core right of our American democracy intended to protect the expressive interests of people, flesh and blood people, some of us wear ties, jackets, whatever, pants usually, also extended now to corporations. So what does that mean concretely? What it concretely means is that corporations can spend whatever they want from the general treasury to influence election outcomes. Now, there's still restrictions in place about giving contributions directly to candidates if you're a corporation, but they can spend to influence election outcomes with whatever amount they choose. Well, how do you get a hold of what that means? Think about this. In the 2008 election cycle, so the amount that was spent by President Obama, by John McCain, by everybody who ran for Congress was around $5 billion. In the 2007-2008 period, ExxonMobil, a single corporation, made $40 billion. So if ExxonMobil chooses, it has the ability to completely overwhelm the political process. Now, they're not going to spend $40 billion, but they're going to start spending more and more. In the 2010 elections, just really shortly after the Supreme Court decision, outside groups which were enabled by the Citizens United decision to then accept all of this and funnel all of this outside corporate money and money from deep-pocketed individuals, often if they chose without even disclosing where the money came from. These outside groups spent $300 million. They supported, in the races that changed hands in the 2008 election in Congress, they supported the winners in about 70 out of 84 cases. So they exerted a decisive influence in the 2010 elections, but it was just the beginning of what's going to happen. Everyone agrees it is going to be far, far worse in 2012. What are the consequences? The consequences are candidates have less control over the electoral process. Outside groups now have much more and will increasingly have more. Progressive candidates have to be willing to go up against basically endless spending, potentially. A lot of people are going to choose not to run in the first place because why bother? Why enter a political system that's so tilted like this? Candidates who are in office are going to know that if they vote the wrong way against particular corporate interests, they face a huge dump of money in their subsequent election. When we've surveyed staffers, they're saying, yeah, we're worried about that, and we're not going to do the same thing. Our members not going to take on the hard issues because we're worried about the next election cycle. And last, because this was a decision that was held under the First Amendment, a constitutional decision, a couple things flow from that. One is it's not just the federal government, it's also state and local governments, where this is going to become a much worse problem over time. $600,000 recently spent by oil interests in a city council race in Oklahoma City. The city council seats pays $12,000 a year for the job. Outside oil interests spent $600,000 to defeat a candidate. And the other thing is, we can do a lot of things, and we'll talk about that, legislatively to diminish the impact of the decision, but we can't undo the decision unless the Supreme Court changes its mind, very unlikely in the foreseeable future, or we adopt a constitutional amendment to overturn the decision. And since that is the only choice the Supreme Court has given us, that's exactly what we have to do.
So how does it work, David? Is it, I'm a corporation, you're a politician, I give you a check, or...
I say thank you very much.
Does it really happen that way, or are there sort of other steps that actually come into play?
Well, we call it institutional corruption because it's legal, and it comes about through institutional mechanisms. It's not, in the old days they actually used to give cash in brown paper bags. And often it was geared to a particular vote, a particular decision. And the thing you have to keep in mind is that at the core here is the dilemma. And the dilemma is that people who have a very, very distinct, strong interest in a regulatory matter, in a tax issue, are highly motivated to do whatever they can to win. If you're a corporation, it could mean millions, tens of millions, perhaps billions of dollars to you. If you're a consumer out there, or a citizen working 2 jobs a week, or maybe not working at all and struggling to get by, yeah, you may be out $5, $10 out of this, in terms of lost taxes that don't come in, or losing some government services, but it truly doesn't mean, that one decision doesn't mean as much to you. So the other side is highly motivated. And so what they do is they find members of Congress, candidates, who are going to generally be sympathetic to them. And it's not always, I'm going to take the money and therefore vote this way just so I can keep my own career going. There are some crass decisions like that. But often they are finding people who are ideologically, policy-wise, simpatico with them. So you don't have to make it a bribe. You don't have to say, you're going to do this otherwise, for the reason of money, when you otherwise wouldn't do this. And also, going back to my first point, a lot of these candidates, once they get in office, know that they're being watched more closely by the special interests who have a sharp interest in the matter than they are by the general public. Because, people look at them for some big votes, maybe on health care reform and some other big matters, but on what to do about EPA regulations or OSHA regulations, what to do about offshore drilling, a lot of this stuff comes and goes so quickly that they don't hear the other side, they don't feel pressure from the other side. And they do have to raise money, and they live within this system where they're every day going out, doing fundraisers. Lobbyists are at the fundraisers, giving them money. These are the people they talk to, they listen to. It's almost an anthropological problem as much of one of laws and legal decisions. So really the key takeaway here is, for anything to change, for there to be a constitutional amendment, or any laws passed, or even a cultural shift that will cause candidates to be less able to take money, there has to be a shift in public sentiment. It has to be, if you can't stop them through laws, it has to be kind of shameful. If an umpire left a baseball game and then there was a story the next day saying that they had taken money from one side, from one set of players, if it was wrong or not, legally, people would say, we don't want that ump coming back again. We think this is not fair, this is not American. And so having sort of a public shift in attitudes and having people say, we've got to pay more attention and look at the cultural way this works is going to, is necessary to get the political change Robert suggests, but also in and of itself, it will produce some element of change.
So the challenge is there's a a small group of the special interests that have a lot of time, a lot of resources to really pay attention and to stay on these elected officials, and the average person doesn't have all of that time or the resources to really be engaged on that, and so sometimes there's the disconnect there.
Oh, it's completely asymmetrical warfare.
Yeah.
I mean, the Chamber of Commerce is highly motivated, to stop, climate change legislation.
Yeah.
Because it could, maybe not raise the cost for some of their industries, but the benefits are going to be 3, 4, 5 to 1. I'm sure, President Clinton will be able to talk about that when he comes on. And so they're at it every day. The rest of us are saying, yeah, climate change, rising oceans, I care about that. It's going to happen in 10 years. I care about it for my kids. But at the same time, no one's paying me to work on this. And I got all these other things to do just in terms of getting by each day.
Yeah.
So that's really this asymmetry that's at the heart of a lot of these issues that you're going to be talking about at the conference.
And one of the interesting things is in Wisconsin, and Lee, you did a lot of research and reporting on this, there was a lot of when the public workers and teachers were protesting Governor Walker's budget that cut collective bargaining benefits, there was a lot of response from the other side, which seemed to be sort of AstroTurf grassroots organizing. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. To think about this huge lobbying structure that we have in D.C., you have to kind of ignore what you learn in school and ignore what they report in the media as what lobbying is, because what most reporters and what most professors will tell you is about the disclosed direct lobbying that has to be cataloged by the Senate or direct contributions to candidates. But that's really only the tip of the iceberg. This entire city is awash in money that goes to different organizations as indirect lobbying. Some of this goes to citizens groups like the AstroTurf organizations that went to Wisconsin and organized counter-protests of the protests against Governor Walker, and it came out that Walker's biggest paper manufacturing, the Koch brothers, some of his other manufacturing allies had funded this group, Americans for Prosperity and the Club for Growth Wisconsin, to fund and orchestrate this grassroots support of Governor Walker. But if you think about the bigger picture here, the direct lobbying dollars that you see reported in the news are only a small part of the picture. For example, in health reform, there was a big study that was released, I think in August of 2009, that said health insurance companies were spending almost $100,000 or over $100,000 a day in direct lobbying and candidate contributions. And that seemed like a big eye-popping number, but it was really just a small part of the problem. See, what the health insurance companies did was that they spread their money all over the city and in AstroTurf organizations all over the country. If you go to Metro Center, there's the Macy's there. Above the Macy's is a lobbying firm called APCO. Look at their disclosed lobbying registrations. None for the health insurance companies. But in fact, the health insurance companies gave them millions of dollars in 2009 to engineer talking points like death panels and rationing boards and all this other hype that you saw coming from the right. And what APCO did was take those talking points and give them to Fox News, to give them to Red State and all the conservative bloggers, to give them to different Republican candidates. Health insurance companies also cut a check for almost $80 million to the Chamber of Commerce to run attack ads. None of it disclosed. No one knew. None of the journalists reporting outside of Think Progress on the health reform debate noted that these big business front groups, these quote-unquote ideological organizations, were really just funded and orchestrated by health insurance companies to create a groundswell of opposition to health reform. But again, none of it was disclosed, none of it was reported, and none of it's traditional lobbying that you see in your political science textbooks or in the media.
The thing is, if listening to Lee here, and the reason they do this too is not so much to persuade members of Congress, which is the typical way we think of lobbying. It's to win the political, cultural battles out there.
Right.
It's to sort of put viruses into the media bloodstream, death panels, bad unions, whatever it might be, a bloodstream, death panels, bad unions, whatever it might be, and they don't have to win these fights. They're playing, they can win if they play to a draw. If they can make the Wisconsin protests, seem all those are just union thugs, and they get the public who is not engaged but watching to sort of say, well, there may be two sides to this. Maybe there are two sides to global warming. That's all they have to do. They don't have to convince you it's not happening. They just have to convince you there's a question. And if there's a question there, well, why should we raise taxes? So that's what this is really all about, and that's where you guys kind of play into this, because those are the big battles that have to be won. You have to win these contextual battles, which is really for your neighbors, hearts and minds. And that's where organizing comes in across the whole front of things, because we're talking about, billions of dollars here, which the groups on the other side usually can't match. So whether it's through Wisconsin uprisings or smart organizing, it's about winning the conceptual battle.
Let me drill down real quickly just to note a part of this lobbying infrastructure that impacts you or students like you. We helped break a story earlier this year that at Florida State University, West Virginia University, Utah State, Clemson, and a couple other schools across the country, the Koch brothers, it's very ideological company that spreads its money, has a very sophisticated lobbying campaign. They were funding entire economics departments at universities, and when the universities took that money, they signed waivers saying that they would let Koch's lobbying office, which is fused with its foundation in Arlington, select professors, select which studies would be written, select different scholarships, basically micromanage the entire university's scholarship program and the type of research they did from their lobbying office. And then when these types of professors or students come out with papers, then they're taken to Washington, D.C., and then cited in reports when lobbying for deregulation or lobbying against climate change. So there's a vicious cycle, and even your campuses are involved.
So there's a role that we're all playing at our universities that we don't even know in terms of the work that we're doing, just our homework and our research papers. It's really interesting. So Robert, hearing about all of the, $80 million and $100,000 a day being, chump change, it's a pretty daunting thing to think about, particularly as folks who, write or do, sort of grassroots activism. What role can we play? How do we counteract those voices?
Well, the first thing, of course, is to get educated about it. And let me just sort of do a shout out to these two guys. So if you want to get some background information, one thing you could do is Google David Corn and read what he's written in the last 20-plus years. You'll get quite an education. Or you could go to the Think Progress blog. And I got to say that Lee and his team are breaking news at a rate that is outrageous compared to the mainstream media. So you got a small group of folks who are just pounding away and breaking stuff like once a week, and it's awesome. So I agree with everything that's been said except one thing that David said. I think to highlight one thing that David said that's really important is this cultural shift. So one thing the Citizens United decision did is it enacted a cultural shift, not in the public, but among the corporate class and the deep-pocketed campaign givers. And it sent a message to them that the old rules of restraint, and as bad as things were, there were self-imposed restraints by the deep pockets and the corporations. Those old self-imposed rules of restraint no longer applied, and we're seeing them fritter away more and more. So there's actually a real cultural move going on among the corporate class. The one thing I disagree with what David said is I don't think that the public sentiment needs to be shifted. The public actually gets this pretty well. You guys all get this. You get 90% of people who think that big business has too much power in Washington, D.C. in polls. 90% is an awesome number. 80% of the population thinks that the Earth revolves around the sun. Think about it, right? Okay. So 90% is amazing. 70% of Tea Party, self-identified Tea Party people think that the Citizens United decision was wrong once it's explained to them in neutral language. So people want change. What we don't have is we don't have people, as the way David was saying, we don't have people mobilized. So they're against it, but they're not mobilized. They're not acting together because all we have is against all this money is all of our collective people power. So if you're passionate about climate change, or you want safe water, you want safe food, you're worried about worker safety, you want to avoid another Wall Street collapse, you're worried about jobs issues, you want a fair education system, you want to bring down these outrageous for-profit colleges, keep doing all that work, but you've also got to do some work on the issue of campaign finance and overturning the Citizens United decision. So how to do that? Well, what I've learned, this is my first Campus Progress conference too, but what I've learned in my 90 minutes here or whatever, is that Campus Progress loves call and response. So what I want you to do is, we created a website, Democracy is for People. It's a really radical notion. Democracy is for people, not for corporations. So democracyisforpeople.org, go there, sign up, and we'll get you engaged and tell you what you can do, doing as much as you want to do to work on a constitutional amendment and a whole bunch of other things to deal with the influence of money in politics. But since it is such a radical notion, and I know this is a really radical audience, let me see if we can try to get you, so you don't ever forget this, democracy is for people. If I get you to chant it a couple times, then I'll feel like I went home and I did my job. Right? So democracy is for people. Forget the org. Democracy is for people. Democracy is for people. Democracy is for people. Now, if you go out and you just sort of chant that, and you tell that to people on the street, we will build the movement.
Yeah. So we only have a few moments left, but one thing, and I want to get to ask you all about what you think what we have in store for the 2012 elections, but one point I think is interesting and is important to remember when we talk about sort of the cultural shift. I think a lot of times when we heard death panels or a lot of the rhetoric that happens around climate change and even unions, when I talk to my family and friends and home back in Michigan, it can be daunting. It sounds like that they might agree with whatever they're hearing, but a lot of it is because there's so much misinformation out there. So it's our job, to educate ourselves, but then also to educate our family and our friends, people that we care about, on a lot of the misinformation that's out there. I think that that's one of the most important and maybe simplest roles that we can play. So I'll just kind of throw it out to you all, and anybody can jump in here, but what do you think is in store for us in the 2012 election with Citizens United and with, all of the presidential candidates talking about the millions and almost billions of dollars they're raising on a weekly basis?
Well, it's already here.
Yeah.
I mean, Robert talked a little bit about the run-up in 2010. That was like really early preseason. And you had people like Tom Perriello, a congressman in Virginia, who supported health care reform, cap and trade, and he came from a Republican kind of conservative district. And from the moment he got into office, really, after 2008, he won just by a couple hundred votes. There were these ads against him, by Citizens for Better Health Care, saying that he was destroying the health care system. And they were relentless and relentless. They went on for 2 years, and he ended up losing as one of the many Democrats who lost in November. And it was really sort of a warm-up. And you see people like Karl Rove, who's advising two of these independent PACs, who are now, we used to at least wait until the election year, but they're running ads against Democrats now, and then the Democrats are responding. Bill Burton, who used to work in the White House, the deputy press secretary, has started a group running ads against Republicans. And these are just going to continue to go on. President Obama says he'd rather not see this, but I think he doesn't want to see the Democrats at a disadvantage. So by the time we actually get to November 2012, there'll be tens of billions of dollars of special interest money flowing into the system, and in some ways it gets candidates, I think even Republican and Democratic candidates alike, upset because it may subsume them. They may lose control. I mean, this is one of the fears that people have, is that the actual candidates will lose total control of their own races, that the messages will be dictated by people who come in with these big ad campaigns, and in these, they'll pick key races, key seats, key committee chairmen, and where you can put $1 or $2 million in, and totally blow them out of the water. So that's going to happen. May have an impact on the presidential race, but really it's in these congressional seats and some Senate seats that are going to be totally up for grabs. And I think the Koch brothers and others are really just drooling here. They're going to have so much more influence. And already, as Robert's group study has shown, members of Democratic members and others are making decisions, calculating, how much of a target do I want to be next time out? So we're going to see a big impact.
It's going to be important for, it sounds like there's going to be a lot of news and ads happening. Yeah,
outside of ads, number one, I think that Obama's going to be outspent. These IEs are going to totally swamp him. But another...
Tell them what an IE is.
Okay. Well, these outside groups, super PACs, 501c4s, all these independent expenditure campaigns. But what won't be on TV and what the media will not report is that Citizens United, part of the decision, opened the door to something else other than unlimited corporate spending on ads and that sort of thing. It opened the door for corporations to coerce and manipulate their employees, their customers, their vendors, their contractors, their subcontractors to support candidates that the business picks. And this was in a confidential memo circulated last year among Republicans and was actually at a presentation that this was one of the hidden benefits of Citizens United at a secret retreat last year with the Chamber of Commerce, a bunch of hedge fund managers and other big money folks who wanted to take out Democrats last year. And we saw in reporting just in the last 2 months from The Nation and Alternet that this was tested, that some of the big manufacturers in the Midwest, the Koch brothers, a few other companies tested this out. They'd sent out mailers to their employees telling them who to vote for. They had closed coercion sessions where they told employees the importance of free enterprise and how Democrats were going to destroy the economy and destroy the country. But this is just the beginning. The Chamber of Commerce is already working on this, and of course their membership includes all the biggest Fortune 500 companies. So they're going to be manipulating you when you buy things to go vote for a certain candidate, and they're going to be manipulating if you use possibly Facebook and a lot of these other social networking platforms, and it'll be very subtle. Because, you know, this is the civil rights era, or the civil rights struggle of our time, as Robert mentioned. But unlike, you know, the factory bosses bringing in the Pinkertons, or in the civil rights struggle, having Bull Connor, you know, all over TV, looking very ugly, and, you know, who would want to be on his side? The corporate lobbyists have Ketchum. They have Burson Marsteller. They can look beautiful. They know how to use the right words to talk to you. They know how to manipulate you. So this is a much bigger, possibly more difficult struggle, and I'll just leave it at that.
So I agree with all that, but I predict also the rise of a counter-citizens movement that you all are going to join by logging on at democracyisforpeople.org.
And unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for this discussion, but I want to thank all of our panelists for being here. Obviously, this is a really important issue, something that doesn't get talked about a lot, like Lee said, in our classrooms, but it's something that we all need to be paying attention to. And I think it's important to remember that democracy is for America, or for the people.
And for people.
Thank you.
Please welcome Emily Wood.